The hills always remembered. That's what the old folks used to say when the wind howled across the ridges and the cold dust settled in every crack of every porch. The land wasn't dead, no matter how many holes men dug into its ribs. It was listening, waiting, watching. Back before this country was even a dream whispered among rebels and tax dodgers across the ocean. The Whitlock family had already sunk their spades into the black seams of the mountains. They dug not with reverence, but with hunger. By the time the 1800s rolled in, their reach had spread far beyond one valley, until the tiny township of Pine Hollow voted to rename itself Whitlock. The family's mining company had become law, church, and breadwinner all in one. And with that new name came a festival, a spectacle meant to declare to anyone with eyes that the Whitlocks had not only tamed the mountains, but commanded them. Music rang, wages were handed out early, and families gathered at the base of Coal Crown Hill, where the Whitlock Company had just erected a new limestone headquarters with a gleaming copper dome that caught the sun brighter than the courthouse or the steeples combined. The patriarch, Edwin Pierce Whitlock, E.P., to his men stepped onto the grand marble steps flanked by his two sons. His presence was carved from the same stone as the building itself, tall, commanding, eyes sharp enough to cut glass. When he raised his hand, silence fell like a blanket over the crowd. E.P. Whitlock unveiled the new town sign. The family name was etched deep into its face. The date of dedication carved below, but there was myriad line of markings, symbols that twisted if you looked too long, as if your mind wasn't meant to hold them. And then, in a voice no human tongue should have been able to produce, E.P. spoke those words aloud. The air itself recoiled. A groan thundered from beneath Coal Crown Hill. Cracks spidered across the marble, across the earth itself, until the ground split wide before the company office. From that jagged wound poured a black dust, thick and alive, curling like smoke with purpose. Children screamed. Mothers pulled them away. But the Mont miners in their uniforms stood frozen, their lungs open, their bodies trembling as they inhaled the darkness. Their mouths slackened, their eyes clouded, and something hollow replaced what once had been there. E.P. walked calmly into the building, descended into the cellar, and laid himself in a coffin carved of blackened oak, every inch etched with the same markings that marred the town's sign. His sons, Corbin and Benton, followed, without a word. E.P. lay still, breathing slow. At a nod, Benton prepared the chains that would lower their father into the breach. But before he could secure them, Corbin drew a hunting knife and, with steady hand, slit his brother's throat. Benton fell silently, eyes wide, before Corbin dragged his body and cast it into the roaring dark alongside their father's casket. The hill shook violently, then fell still. Outside, the miners stood glass-eyed, emptied vessels waiting for orders that would never be theirs again. With its capital thus baptized, the Whitlock Mining Company set its sights on expansion. For decades, their operations spread like rot through Appalachia. They bought out smaller companies, forced families off their land, and when persuasion failed, they sent a special representative, sometimes Corbin himself, sometimes the shadow of Benton, who had not stayed dead. Benton was a nightmare in flesh, a revenant dragged back from the breach. Families who refused to sell would wake to find him at their doorstep, eyes like coal embers, voice like a rusted saw. Most signed over their land before the week was done. Others simply disappeared. But revenants never last. Benton grew reckless, leaving towns in ruin when he had only been sent to silence a single tax man or rabble-rouser. His father, deep beneath Coal Crown Hill, tolerated the destruction only so long. Labor was costly to replace. Whispers grew in company halls. Benton was becoming a liability. And so, E.P. turned his eye toward creation once more. Years passed. The chains lowered E.P.'s coffin deeper still, until it rested beyond stone and soil, in places where light had never been. For months, the headquarters above lay abandoned, windows rattling from subterranean tremors, air colder inside than out. Clerks muttered of voices rising through the floorboards, whispers in languages no ear could decipher. Then, one moonless winter night, the chains rattled again. The coffin rose. From its depths, a daughter was born. They called her Pauline Whitlock, though in private E.P. used no such gentle name. To him, she was his finest creation, forged not only of flesh, but of will, strength, and hunger. From her earliest years, Pauline was unlike other children. At 3, when a nanny tried to pull her inside from chasing fireflies, Pauline's tiny hand morphed into a monstrous gauntlet of bone, crushing the woman's wrist before returning to normal size. The nanny's screams echoed for weeks. Rather than shame, E.P. smiled. He had no use for soft-hearted daughters. He needed a weapon versatile, intelligent, ruthless, and Pauline was exactly that. She grew into a tall, striking woman, raven-haired, amber-eyed, with a presence that commanded every room she entered. In government halls, she was the perfect negotiator, polished, articulate, impossible to ignore. At banquets, she charmed wealthy investors. In the mines, she dealt justice with swift brutality. When foremen skimmed from company profits, Pauline cut off their hands. When workers dared to whisper the word union, she collapsed tunnels on their heads or made public examples so brutal that survivors carried the lesson for generations. And yet, the whispers of rebellion only grew louder as the Great Depression settled heavy on the land. Families had nothing left to lose, and men began to believe they deserved more than death in the dark. By autumn of 1930, the Whitlocks decided it was time for a new Lesson 1 final. Devastating strike against hope itself. One evening, a black Cadillac rolled up the winding road to the limestone mansion known as Whitlock House, its copper dome dulled by time, but still gleaming in the dying sun. Pauline stepped out, heels clicking on marble steps, flanked by her 2 lieutenants, men who had served her since the 20s, Carter Crane, lanky and nervous, and Jonas Churchwell, stocky, solid, the quieter of the pair. Inside, Pauline descended into the bowels of the mansion. The sigils that had once adorned her father's coffin now crawled across the walls and floors like spreading veins. Her brothers knelt at the edge of the crevasse where E.P.'s casket rested, their eyes turned toward the blackness. Between them sat a crate hewn of the same cursed oak as their father's coffin, runes crawling across its surface, holes pocked its sides. Something moved within. "Father has chosen you," Corbin said. Benton hissed from the shadows, eyes hollow. Pauline smiled politely, though the rivalry between them was carved as deep as the mines. She placed her hand on the crate. The wood was ice cold. Something inside exhaled. "What is it?" she asked. "You'll see," Corbin replied. "Take it to the coal camps. Let it loose. When it's done, load it back in and move to the next. Unless, of course, you can't handle it." Pauline's smile sharpened. "We'll be just fine." She gestured, and her men lifted the crate. Together, they carried it back to the waiting Cadillac. The car roared to life, its headlights cutting into the night as they headed south. Destination, the coal camps of West Virginia. The workers there had begun to organize, to dream of rights, to believe they might be stronger together. It was Pauline's job to remind them, in no uncertain terms, that dreams in these mountains belonged to the Whitlocks. Word of the massacre at Ashford Hollow spread like wildfire through the coal fields. No one dared print it in the papers. Of course, too many editors had debts to the Whitlocks, but miners carried the tale from camp to camp. The story twisted in the telling, each man adding details of his own. Yet the heart remained the same. A monster had come, unleashed by the company's own blood. Some swore it was a demon. Others whispered it was Benton Whitlock himself, risen yet again from the grave, his hunger now unquenchable. Mothers hushed their children at night, warning them to obey lest the creature come scratching at their windows. For Pauline, the fear was better than wages, better than profit. Fear was control. The campaign continued. In Dunlow Camp, the miners had gathered to demand shorter hours after a shaft collapse buried 6 alive. Pauline arrived with her lieutenants and the crate. By the time she left, the camp's meeting hall was painted red, and the demands had vanished into silence. In Maple Run, a union organizer from Pittsburgh stirred hope among the men. Pauline listened to his fiery speech from the back of the crowd, her hat pulled low. When the time was right, she gave a single nod. The crate was opened in the schoolhouse where he had roused them, and by dawn the desks were overturned and the walls dripped with blood. The organizer's tongue was nailed to the blackboard as a lesson. Everywhere she went, the pattern repeated, whispers of resistance. Pauline's arrival, then screams and silence. Yet, for all her efficiency, not everyone within the family approved. One night, back at Whitlock House, Pauline returned from another mission to find her brother Corbin waiting in the marble foyer. He stood tall, shoulders squared, his suit immaculate, though his eyes burned with restrained fury. "You're reckless," he said without greeting. Pauline removed her gloves, tossing them to a waiting clerk. "And yet effective. You slaughter entire towns when Father orders a single man silenced. Do you know how costly it is to replace a labor force? How suspicious it looks when every camp you touch is drenched in blood." She tilted her head, a smile playing at her lips. "Maybe if you handled the men yourself, they'd respect you, but you'd rather sit behind a desk, counting coins." Corbin's jaw tightened. "Don't mistake patience for weakness. Sister, Father entrusted this work to you." But his favor shifts quickly. From the shadows near the stairwell, another voice rasped, a voice dry as dead leaves. "Favor fades. Blood endures." Pauline's smile vanished as Benton stepped into the light. His form flickered, half solid, half wraith, his skin ashen, his eyes glowing faintly. Though long dead, his presence filled the room with a chill that made the clerks scatter. "You should thank me, sister," Benton hissed. "I gave Father the sacrifice that birthed you. Without my throat cut, you'd never have drawn breath." Pauline met his gaze without flinching. "And yet here you stand, clinging to a life that isn't yours. You're a shadow, nothing more." He bared his teeth, but Corbin raised a hand, stepping between them. "Enough. We are family, whether we like it or not. Father has a greater design. We'd do well to remember that." That night, Pauline descended alone into the basement sanctum, where the black coffin still rested in the fissure at the center of the marble floor. The runes had spread wider since her childhood, crawling across every wall, every pillar, glowing faintly as if pulsing with breath. She approached the edge and knelt. "Father," she whispered, "your children bicker while your work is unfinished. Give me guidance." From the depths, a voice rumbled, not spoken, but felt, vibrating through bone and blood. "The land is restless. The cattle grow bold. You will break them. You will remind them who rules the dark beneath their feet." Pauline bowed her head. "Yes, Father, that will be done." But another whisper followed, softer, curling into her ear like smoke. "Beware your brothers. Blood runs thin when ambition runs deep." Her eyes flicked to the shadows along the wall. For an instant, She thought she saw Benton's hollow form watching her. But when she turned, the space was empty. Weeks bled into months. The Great Depression deepened. Breadlines stretched around blocks in the cities. Families in the hollers starved. The harder times grew. The fiercer the miners clung to hope, and the more often Pauline was summoned to snuff it out. But something was shifting. At Black Hollow Mine, the men did not scatter when she arrived. They stood firm, tools in hand, eyes burning with desperation. When she opened the crate, the creature lunged, but the miners fought back with dynamite and fire. It still slaughtered dozens before she sealed it away. But the defiance rattled her more than she cared to admit. Later, in the Cadillac, she studied her reflection in the window. For the first time, doubt gnawed at her. If men could look death in the eye and still refuse to kneel, perhaps Father's grip wasn't as absolute as he believed. Carter Crane noticed her silence. "Ma'am?" he asked softly. Pauline straightened, masking the flicker of unease. "Drive on," she said. "There are more lessons to be taught." But inside, she wondered, how many lessons would it take before the students turned on the teacher? Back at Whitlock House, Corbin convened a meeting in the grand dining hall. The chandeliers glowed weakly, their lights swallowed by the creeping runes that etched even the ceiling now. Servants kept their eyes down, trembling as they laid out wine and roast. Pauline entered late, sweeping in with Crane and Churchwell at her heels. Benton sat at the far end, his form flickering like candlelight, his presence souring the air. Corbin stood at the head of the table, his hands gripping the polished wood. "Sister," he said, his voice controlled, "Father has given me new instructions." Pauline arched a brow. "Has he now?" "He wishes for subtlety. No more slaughtering whole towns. We need order, not chaos. He has other plans that require stability." Pauline's laugh was low, sharp. "Since when did you interpret Father's will better than I?" "Since you turned half of West Virginia into a graveyard." Corbin snapped. "You're drawing too much attention. Politicians are sniffing around. Journalists whisper of disappearances. We can't afford exposure." Benton leaned forward, his hollow grin wide. "Perhaps Father has tired of his little princess." Pauline's eyes narrowed. "Careful, brother. You may fade into smoke before your words reach my ears." Corbin slammed his fist on the table, dishes rattling. "Enough. Father commands unity, and unity we shall have. He has summoned us all to the sanctum tomorrow night. There, he will reveal his greater design." Silence fell, heavy as cold dust. Pauline said nothing more. She only sipped her wine, the metallic taste mingling with something darker at the back of her throat. Later, in her chambers, she stood at the window overlooking the dark hills. Below, the company town lights twinkled faintly, fragile against the endless night. She thought of the steward at Ashford Hollow, his defiance even as the creature tore into him. She thought of the miners at Black Hollow, striking matches against terror itself. For the first time, she wondered if her father's empire might not be unbreakable. Perhaps the land itself was turning against them. She whispered to the glass, her breath fogging the pain. "If blood is what binds us, then blood may also unmake us." Behind her, the shadows stirred. Benton's voice rasped from the corner. "Careful, sister. Doubt is more dangerous than any monster in that crate." Pauline did not turn. She did not answer. She simply stared into the night, the weight of tomorrow's summons pressing heavy on her chest. The following evening, Whitlock House pulsed with a strange energy. Servants whispered of groans deep in the foundations, of windows rattling though no wind stirred outside. The sigils that had crawled across the marble now glowed faintly, veins of light spreading like a sickness through the walls. Pauline dressed with precision, a gray wool suit, a crimson blouse, gloves of supple leather. She pinned her black hair back, her face calm though her stomach knotted. Crane and Churchwell waited at her door, grim as ever. "Stay above tonight," she told them. "What happens in the sanctum is for blood alone." They bowed, though uneasily. Pauline descended the staircase alone. The sanctum smelled of stone dust and iron. Torches burned in sconces along the walls, their flames guttering as if starved for air. At the center gaped the fissure, wide enough now to swallow a wagon. The coffin of Edwin Pierce Whitlock suspended by chains that creaked and groaned as though under some immense strain. Corbin stood near the edge, posture rigid, his hands clasped behind his back. Benton hovered at the opposite side, his wraith-like form barely solid, his grin mocking. Pauline entered without hesitation, heels ringing on the marble. "You're late?" Corbin said. "I arrive exactly when I intend," she replied. Before they could bicker further, the chains rattled. A deep tremor shook the floor. From the coffin, a voice emerged, no longer just a whisper in the blood, but a thunder that filled the chamber. "Children." They froze. Even Benton inclined his flickering head. "You have carried my will through decades of dust and darkness. Yet the cattle grow restless. They test the boundaries of fear. They dream of freedom. Dreams must be crushed." Pauline bowed her head. "I have done all you asked, Father. They fear me." Corbin's jaw tightened. "Fear alone breeds chaos. We need obedience. Order." The voice rumbled like shifting earth. "Both are necessary. Fear to bind their spirits, order to guide their hands. But the time for small lessons is over. The time for revelation has come." The fissure widened with a grinding crack. From the depths rose another crate, larger than the first, carved with runes that burned brighter than fire. The chain strained, lowering it onto the marble with a heavy thud. Holes along its sides exhaled a foul breath, damp and hot. Pauline felt her pulse quicken. "What is it?" "The culmination of sacrifice," the voice thundered. "A weapon not for towns or camps, but for nations. With it, the world itself shall kneel. But it requires a hand and a heart strong enough to wield it." Pauline's gaze locked on the box. Every fiber of her being ached to claim it. Yet she sensed the same hunger radiating from Corbin. Benton drifted closer, his smoky grin widening. "Father," Corbin said, his voice steady. "I have led this company for decades. My hand is steady, my mind disciplined. Give the weapon to me." Pauline stepped forward. "No. You tally profits while I bleed in the field. I have proven my strength, my ruthlessness, my loyalty. It is mine." Benton hissed, his voice like gravel. "You both forget. It was my death that bought your lives, my sacrifice that opened the breach. If anyone deserves Father's gift, it is I." The torches sputtered. The runes on the crate blazed. Edwin Pierce's voice shook the walls. "Prove yourselves." The chamber descended into chaos. Corbin lunged first, drawing a blade hidden in his coat. Pauline met him head-on, her gloved hand transforming in a blurb one surging outward, forming the monstrous gauntlet she had carried since childhood. Steel clashed against bone with a scream of sparks. Benton shrieked, his body dissolving into smoke before reforming behind Pauline. His clawed hands raked across her shoulder, icy pain searing through flesh. She spun, striking him with her gauntlet, but her fist passed through half-solid mist. He laughed, a sound that chilled the marrow. "Fight, sister. Show Father your worth." Corbin pressed his assault, blade flashing in torchlight. Pauline deflected blow after blow, her strength barely holding against his precision. He was a soldier in every sense, gold, calculating, relentless. With a snarl, she drove him back, her gauntlet crashing into his chest. He stumbled, coughing blood, but did not fall. "Father," he rasped. "She's reckless. She'll destroy everything." Pauline's eyes burned. Better destruction than stagnation. Benton surged again, smoke coiling, his form stretching monstrous as he hurled himself at both siblings. His claws gouged the marble, his laughter echoing as the runes flared brighter. The fissure yawned wider, the chains rattling violently. From within the coffin, Edwin Pierce's voice rose once more. "Enough." A blast of force rippled from the fissure, hurling all three back. Pauline slammed into a pillar. Gasping, Corbin skidded across the floor, his blade clattering away. Benton howled, his smoky form flickering wildly. "You bicker like children while the world waits. Hear me, the weapon will not be entrusted to the unworthy. You will carry it together or you will perish together." Pauline staggered to her feet, chest heaving. She met her brother's eyes, fury burning in each pair. The command was clear. Their father's will was law. Corbin wiped blood from his mouth, his expression hard. "Then we are bound." Benton's grin was sharp as broken glass. "For now?" Pauline flexed her gauntlet, then let it fade back into flesh. "So be it. We'll wield it together." But in her heart, a different thought whispered, "Only until I find a way to claim it for myself." Later, in her chambers, Pauline sat at her vanity, staring at her reflection in the dim lamplight. Her gloves lay discarded. The skin of her right hand shimmered faintly, the bone beneath restless. Eager, she thought of the crate, of the breath that seeped through its holes, of the power that pulsed within. She thought of her brother's one flesh, one ghost, both obstacles, and she thought of the miners, those ragged men who had dared to stand against her even when faced with monsters. Something about their defiance gnawed at her, a splinter she could not pull free. Was her father right? Was fear enough to hold the world forever? Or would the day come when even fear broke? She blew out the lamp. In darkness, the question lingered like cold dust in the lungs. The next morning, Whitlock House stirred with unease. Servants avoided the sanctum, whispering of voices rising from the fissure. Clerks muttered about shipments delayed, minds restless. The land itself seemed to groan beneath their feet. Pauline joined Corbin in the study. Maps covered the desk, red lines stretching across Appalachia and beyond. Corbin pointed to a circle drawn around West Virginia. "We begin here," he said. "Father commands a demonstration. Not a town this time. A county. We'll unleash the weapon and erase it from the map. The rest will fall in line." Pauline studied the map, her lips curling. "Ambitious. I like it." Benton's voice drifted from the corner, unseen but present. "And who will hold the leash? Who commands the beast when it grows hungry?" Corbin's eyes flicked to Pauline. "We do. Together." She met his gaze, a dangerous spark in her amber eyes. "Yes, brother. Together." But as her hand brushed the map, her fingers traced the circle with longing. In her mind, she already felt the leash in her grip, the power hers alone. The chosen county was Fairwood, a cluster of hollers and valleys bound together by one sprawling mine. Nearly every family in those ridges owed its bread to the Whitlock Company. But hunger had made them bold. Union talk was no longer whispers in back rooms, it was shouted on porches, preached from pulpits, carried in songs sung on the picket line. It was here, Father declared, that the weapon would make its mark. The Cadillac rolled into Fairwood beneath a sky heavy with storm. Pauline sat in the back seat, the massive crate filling most of the trunk, its runes glowing faintly even through the steel. Corbin rode beside her, stiff and silent, while Benton drifted unseen, his cold presence settling in the corners of the car. Children played in the mud as they passed, their laughter brittle, their eyes wary. Women watched from porches, their faces hollow. Men gathered in knots near the Union Hall, voices rising in defiance. Pauline felt the air bristle. These people were ready for war. At the edge of town, they stopped. Crane and Churchwell followed in a second car, struggling under the weight of the crate as they carried it into the abandoned schoolyard. Pauline led the way, her heels sinking slightly in the damp earth. Corbin flanked her, jaw set. The townsfolk gathered quickly, drawn by curiosity, fear, or both. The Union steward, a tall man with a battered fedora, stepped forward. "You've come to threaten us again," he said, voice steady. "But we're not afraid. Not anymore." Pauline's smile was cold. "Fear isn't a choice, Mr. Lawson. It's a fact of life." She nodded. Crane and Churchwell lowered the crate. The runes pulsed, light seeping through the cracks. The air grew heavy, pressing against lungs, hearts, bones. Corbin glanced at her. "Together," he reminded. Pauline whispered the words etched into the wood. The lid shuddered, creaked, and then burst open. The thing that rose from the box was no mere monster. It dwarfed the creature she had unleashed in Ashford Hollow. Twice the height of a man. It stood hunched, its body a grotesque fusion of bone and sinew, its chest glowing with veins of fire. Its mouth opened impossibly wide, emitting a sound that was neither roar nor scream, but something older, something that made the sky itself flinch. Panic rippled through the crowd. Some ran, others froze. The steward Lawson planted his feet, fists clenched, as if his defiance alone might hold the thing at bay. "Command it," Corbin hissed. "Now." Pauline raised her hand. The creature's head swiveled toward her, smoke pouring from its nostrils. For a heartbeat, it hesitated, then obeyed, turning its fury on the Union Hall. Its claws tore through wood and stone like paper, collapsing the roof in a storm of dust. Screams erupted. The monster tore into the fleeing crowd, rending bodies with casual swipes, flames leaking from its wounds. The air filled with fire, ash, and the copper tang of blood. Pauline's gauntlet flared from her arm, the bone-white weapon pulsing in rhythm with the creature's movements. She felt connected to it, almost one with its hunger. Each death fed her veins with heat, each scream a surge of strength. And yet something was wrong. The beast did not stop. Even when the Union Hall lay in ruins, even when the townsfolk scattered, it continued its rampage. It struck down women, children, anything that moved. It grew faster, larger, more violent with each kill. Corbin shouted, trying to pull its leash. Benton's laughter echoed from the shadows, cruel and delighted. "You've lost control, sister. The beast chooses its own master now." Pauline fought to rein it in, but the connection slipped like water through her fingers. The creature turned its burning eyes on her, a guttural growl rumbling deep within. For the first time in years, fear stabbed Pauline's heart. The townsfolk, desperate and wild, began to fight back. Men hurled sticks of dynamite. Women fired hunting rifles. Children threw rocks. Against the beast. It was like gnats against a storm, but together. Their resistance bought moments. The steward Lawson, bleeding from a gash across his brow, raised a shotgun and fired point-blank into the creature's glowing chest. The blast staggered it. The crowd roared, renewed. Pauline seized the chance. She thrust her gauntlet skyward, screaming words in the rune's language. The crate pulsed, its runes blazing, and the creature howled in pain. Chains of light whipped from the box, wrapping around its limbs, dragging it inch by inch back toward its prison. It fought savagely, each step carving more death into the dirt. Corbin joined her chant, his voice hoarse but strong. Even Benton, grinning through his smoke, muttered the words. though whether to help or hinder, none could tell. At last, with a final roar that split the clouds above, the monster was dragged back into the crate. The lid slammed shut, the runes dimming to a faint glow. The battlefield lay silent. The schoolyard was strewn with bodies. The Union Hall a smoldering ruin. Survivors clutched each other, staring with a mix of terror and hatred at the Whitlocks. Pauline stood trembling, sweat streaking her face, her gauntlet dripping blood that was not her own. She had won, but at what cost? The fear in the townsfolk's eyes was no longer submission. It was rage. Corbin wiped his blade on his sleeve, his expression grim. This is what comes of your recklessness. Father's weapon nearly destroyed us all. Pauline met his glare, her voice raw. It was Father's design, not mine, and you obeyed as quickly as I did. Benton's laughter rasped through the smoke. You see it now, don't you? Fear alone won't hold them. They'll come for us. And when they do, maybe it's time we let the whole world burn. Pauline looked at the survivors. She saw Lawson still standing, bloodied but unbroken, his eyes burning with a fire she could not extinguish. She realized then that the weapon had failed not because it lacked power, but because men and women who had nothing left to lose were beyond fear. That night, back at Whitlock House, the siblings faced their father's voice once more. You faltered. The voice rumbled. The cattle still dream. Pauline clenched her fists. No, Father, they don't dream. They fight. And fighting breeds martyrs. You've given them stories stronger than fear. Corbin spat. She's weak. Father, she doubts. Silence. The voice commanded. You will obey. The world must kneel, no matter the cost. Pauline bowed her head outwardly, but inside, something shifted. For the first time, she questioned whether obedience was strength or cowardice. She left the sanctum with her brothers, her steps echoing in the cold marble. The fissure rumbled behind her, but she no longer trembled. Weeks later, the Union fires still burned in Fairwood. Despite the deaths, despite the terror, the people organized stronger than before. The Whitlock's weapon had scarred them, but it had not broken them. In her chamber, Pauline stared into the mirror. The gauntlet shimmered faintly beneath her skin. Her reflection looked back. Sharp, beautiful, dangerous. For the first time, she wondered whether she was her father's weapon or something else entirely.